This is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we're going to be talking about Benjamin Tucker. Before we start, I'd like to recommend that you guys check out my other videos in this series, Who is Samuel Konkin, Who is Josiah Warren, Who is Lysander Spooner, and look for more to come, including Who is Karl Hess, and other anarchists in America, and maybe extending to historical anarchists and radicals around the world. Benjamin Tucker was born in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts on April 17, 1854. He attended the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was a prohibitionist, a woman suffragist, a supporter of the 8-hour movement, and a religious radical. In 1872, after studying engineering for a while, he began to study political philosophy. And this may have came about due to a really interesting meeting that he attended, the New England Labor Reform League in 1872 in Boston, where he met Josiah Warren, William B. Greene, and in November of 72, he began communication with another anarchist, Ezra Heywood. In 1874, he went to Europe and he studied the writings of Proudhon. And August 1875, his first act of standing up against the state came as he refused to pay a poll tax in Princeton, and he was incarcerated in the Worcester County Jail for his refusal to pay such a tax. And in 1875, he became the associate editor of The Word, published by Ezra Heywood, who I had mentioned a moment ago. After 1 year of working with Ezra Heywood, he resigned from The Word. Benjamin Tucker said that Ezra Heywood dedicated too much time and space to love reform and not labor reform, which was Benjamin Tucker's key concern. And in May 1877, he started the Radical Review, and he would run this Radical Review for almost a full year, and it would end in February 1878. And the Radical Review featured Stephen Pearl Andrews, Lysander Spooner, William B. Greene, Heywood, and Ingalls as well. Many well-known radicals and libertarians and anarchists in America at that time contributed to the Radical Review. At this point, he took a 2-year break from radical propaganda and began getting involved in journalism in Boston. And this, for those who are unaware, this is sort of a tradition, a long tradition of radicals and of anarchists to double as journalists. And I think this is because it allows them to continue to write and to have a day job where you get to use their good skills they already have, which is writing, and dedicate the rest of their time to propagating their message. And on August 6th, 1881, a very important date, when Benjamin Tucker started his journal Liberty, which ended up becoming the longest-lived radical periodical of economic or a political nature, and he believed that an understanding of economics would lead to liberty, to true freedom. He was well known for his discussions on the 4 monopolies by which he said the ruling class was able to manipulate and control everything else. This was the monopoly on land, the monopoly on credit, the monopoly on tariffs, and patents and copyrights. Tucker wanted to be able to identify the somebody who benefited off of the surplus wealth that was produced by labor. He understood that labor created wealth, and he said there was these people at the top that were able to benefit off that and enjoy the fruits of that without putting in anything of their own. He considered these to be landlords, bankers, all byproducts of privilege. Privilege by where they work to get privilege from the state in order to financially benefit. He said that this privilege that the bankers, landlords, and such possessed was derived from a possession of power and was enjoyed by a few. And this was again caused by a monopoly on power and services. The remedy to this, he believed, was competition. A quote from him says, "The usurer is the somebody, the state is his protector." And usury is, of course, a rent, a tax. Because of this, he worked tirelessly to expose the state, because he believed the state was protecting the ruler class, these individuals who were coming in and using privilege to manipulate economic situations and to gain power over people. He also focused on money and said that the centralization of the financial system by the federal government, states, and national banks were laws that created monopolies, and he also fought the gold standard, calling it a privileged product. Benjamin Tucker supported the idea that was known as free money at that time, and his quote says, What the Friends of Free Money are fighting for is the right both of individuals and of cooperators to issue money when and as they choose, and what they are fighting against is the laws which in any way make it impossible for either individuals or cooperators to exercise this right. This, and nothing else, is the free money theory. Tucker believed that authority, specifically in the form of the church and the state, should be fought, and he believed that they should be fought together. As I mentioned, he was a religious radical. He was very much against, especially for his time period in the late 1800s, the waning influence of the church on American life. Obviously, there's still that influence today, but at that point it was much more prevalent, and he was fighting that as much as he was fighting against the state. Benjamin Tucker said that anarchism will lead to liberty only by fighting against all authority. He said, "The purpose of liberty, boiled down to its ultimate essence, is the abolition of authority." Benjamin Tucker said that authority worship was being transferred from the church to the organs of the state. It is human authority that hereafter is to be dreaded, and the state, its organ, that in the future is to be dreaded. Those who have lost their faith in gods only to put in governments, those who have ceased to be church worshippers only to become state worshippers, those who have abandoned pope for king or czar, and priest for president or parliament, have indeed changed their battleground, but nonetheless are the foes of liberty still. He believed the basis of anarchism rested on the greatest amount of liberty compatible with equality of liberty. And he believed in carefully defining terms like the state and government. The anarchist defines government as invasion, nothing more or less. Protection against invasion, then, is the opposite of government. Anarchists, in favor of the abolition of government, favor the abolition of invasion, not protection against invasion. On the other hand, anarchists everywhere saw the state only as compulsory and a usurpatory institution, quote, whose real purposes are offense and invasion, an institution to which all are forced to belong and which all are compelled to support. He also argued that participation in government, voting, paying taxes, or jury duty was presumptive evidence that consent had been given, but he said that, rightly argued, you couldn't say that the state had the support of the people because taxes were not voluntary and were not consensual. The most lamentable spectacle today, Benjamin Tucker said, is the short-sighted reformer attempting to secure greater liberty by advocating the method of greater authority, more invention, more government. He also believed in the abolition of taxes and the abolition of the state itself. He was concerned with abolishing statism, but he did not believe that armed insurrection could work. He said the job of the anarchist was to create a public sentiment rendering the collection of taxes or any other act construed as invasion to be extremely difficult or impossible. He said the state was an instrument of aggression, and its demise would be brought only by individuals who, through their various acts of non-cooperation and obstruction, could, quote, succeed in stripping the state of its invasive powers. And he believed this was about the best that any anarchist could hope for, because he did not see that violence could succeed in any way. Benjamin Tucker said, personal government is the only true government. He said that the oppression housed in ballot boxes is the same deadly genius that lurks in the palace. And here's another great quote from Benjamin Tucker on the state. Our purpose is the abolition not only of all existing states, but the state itself. It is not a thing that can be especially defined by Russia, Germany, Great Britain, or Massachusetts. The state is a principle, a philosophical error in social existence. The state is chaos, rioting under the guise of law, order, and morality. The state is not government, since it denies liberty. The state becomes impossible the moment you remove from it the element of compulsion. And essentially he's just saying there that, like many of us know, the state itself depends on coercing people, and it can't be seen as legitimate because it, again, is not consensual, is not voluntary. Tucker was also criticized, though, for not offering a solution to replace the state. As many know, that it's easy to be a thinker, but without putting forth solutions, people are often critical. This is what he had to say about that. Now, so far from not offering anything in the place of what is now falsely called government, we have something very tangible to offer, something very rational, practical, and easy of application. We offer cooperation. We offer non-compulsive organization. We offer associative combination. We offer every possible method of voluntary social union by which men and women may act together for the furtherance of well-being. In short, we offer voluntary scientific socialism, in the place of the present compulsory unscientific organization which characterizes the state and all of its ramifications. Now we start to move into the post-1880 period, which really started to see the influence and the division in the anarchist movement, because we had an influx of immigrant anarchists coming from Europe and from Russia. And at first, Liberty, Benjamin Tucker's journal, was sympathetic and as well as critical of different parts of this movement. He initially supported the European and Russian anarchists who were influenced by Bakunin, and he also supported Kropotkin. This is, of course, the thought leaders in the anarcho-collectivist and communist movements. And he supported Kropotkin's Swiss journal, Les Revoltes. He supported the Italian anarchists, including Malatesta, the German anarchist Johann Most, who was later an enemy of Benjamin Tucker. And he celebrated the International Working People's Association in London, 1881. He encouraged socialistic groups to pursue, quote, revolution by means other than politics. And it is said that two events particularly shattered the solidarity that was starting to unfold between the American anarchists, the Tuckerites, what sometimes are known as the Boston anarchists. Not, many of them were not from Boston, but that was the name that was given to them, against the immigrant European Russian anarchists, who would sometimes later come to be known as the Chicago anarchists. So you essentially have these two different schools, and of course there's more nuance to it than that, but Tucker was the leading American anarchist thinker at that time, and he was very influential, and a lot of the guys coming in, specifically Johann Most, were trying to spread their anarcho-communist and anarcho-collectivist beliefs in America, and it did cause division. These two incidents that caused division we're about to go into were the Pittsburgh Anarchist Congress of October 1883 and the Haymarket Affair. So when Johann Most arrived, America already had intellectual journals. He started to get involved encouraging violence and direct action. He was very well known for being the propagator of the idea of propaganda of the deed, which is often violent tactics used against the state and against the capitalist class. Tucker separated from these anti-statists on violence and reorganizing society around communist decentralization. He said free choice would decide the social order, not any one anarchist vision. One of the Europeans was Burnett G. Haskell, who spent time in San Francisco, was also a writer in the Truth magazine journal. Haskell helped bring about the Pittsburgh Congress of 1883, and Tucker warned individualist anarchists to carefully examine any document that may be presented at the conference and to be careful before signing any sort of alliances or anything of that sort. So he was already going into it with this negative mentality, and it seems like his stature as a thinker definitely influenced other people going into that. And this split with Haskell created division among the anarchists, and the anarchists began splitting into the individualist and communist camps after that Congress, which was largely seen as a failure. And then we have the Haymarket Affair. Henry Appleton, who was a friend of Tucker, he attacked communists and said that the communists wanted centralization. And he said that they were at war with the native anarchists on March 27th, 1886. Tucker launched a full-page attack on Johann Most and the New York German anarchists. Tucker accused Most and the German anarchists of setting fire to their own property to collect insurance money, and Johann Most denied the allegations. The Haymarket bombing, which is another important historical event. If you don't know much about it, please do look further into it. We're going to talk a little bit about it here as it relates to Benjamin Tucker, but it's worth its own study. The Haymarket bombing, though, it completely divided the anarchist movement. So essentially there was a big protest and a rally going on that ended up turning into a bombing. There was some anarchists involved. And this is also when anarchism started to get associated with violence because of people like Johann Most, unfortunately. His promotion of violence and of propaganda of the deed is why many people have this lasting idea of anarchism as violence. At first, Tucker defended Most upon his arrest, and he believed that the 8 men involved accused were state socialists except for Adolf Fischer. So even though Tucker was empathetic to their cause, he was still willing to call them out and say, these guys aren't actually anarchists. They're state socialists. They want to use the state. They have this idea how they want the state to look, and they're calling it anarchy, but it's not actually anarchy. He supported Adolf Fischer. Tucker completely rejected violence as a valuable option, preferring peaceful propaganda and passive resistance. He said, "The Chicago communists have chosen the violent course, and the result is to be foreseen. Their predicament is due to a resort to methods that liberty emphatically disapproves. As between them and the state, liberty's sympathies are with them. But as they, by their folly, are doing their utmost to help the state, liberty cannot work with them or devote too much energy to their defense." Tucker continued to berate Johann Most, stating that he was not an anarchist, and Most said that Tucker's support of private property was exploitation of labor. So we have these divisions and these different arguments that still go on today, beginning at this point in time between the immigrant European Russia, specifically German anarchists, bringing in his communist anarchists. And Tucker was critical of Marxism. He was sympathetic, though, to Kropotkin's voluntary communism. And he has some interesting views on anarchism and socialism, and I think often may conflict with what some people think about anarchism and socialism in the modern time, because Benjamin Tucker's work is followed and supported by a lot of different people, some who are considered quote-unquote right anarchists, anarcho-capitalists, who follow his work but then apply a subjective value theory to his work and apply Austrian economics to some of his ideas and get rid of some of his more labor theories and his labor concerns. But it's interesting to see how his views on socialism and anarchism, how many different people agree with him but interpret them in different ways. He said that anarchism was the doctrine that all affairs of men should be managed by individuals or voluntary associations, and that the state should be abolished. Anarchism is for liberty, and neither for nor anything else. Socialism, on the other hand, he said, was the belief that the next important step in progress is a change in man's environment of an economic character that shall include the abolition of every privilege whereby the holder of wealth acquires an antisocial power to compel tribute. Thus, the battle of socialism was with usury, that of anarchism was with the authority, and the two tended to overlap, he said. State socialism, though, was an altogether different matter. He said that basically, these people were statists, and to utilize the state or the government of the state to effect the objectives of socialism was to promote a campaign of physical force as a means whereby it might be done. So obviously he was against using the government to achieve his goals. He praised Marx, but thought that he was the enemy of anarchists. He was also critical of Henry George, who is known for Georgism, Geoism, and his single tax theory. And he feared that land nationalization, as a result of uniform land taxation system, would be the result of Henry George's ideas. The sociologist Herbert Spencer, who was also influential with many people, many anarchists at that time, and sometimes is quoted by voluntarists today, he was supported by Benjamin Tucker and fellow liberty writer Victor Yaros originally. Herbert Spencer, the sociologist and philosopher, he'd written the chapter, The Right to Ignore the State, only later to sell out, and eventually Yaros and Tucker became harshly critical of him, and they wrote an essay about him in 1890. So there were three different distinct periods of conflict that existed during the journal Liberty, and it became one of the most popular in the world, and these debates were followed by people everywhere. Benjamin Tucker would allow all different types of opinions, but ultimately, though, he remained the editor and he remained in charge, and his views did kind of guide the direction that the paper took, but he always allowed for alternating and opposing viewpoints. Some of these debates, as I said, they caused deep conflict, and a couple of them were around some powerful ideas that we're going to get into now. Tucker believed reform communities were a waste of time. He disagreed with the idea that improving individual character would achieve superior social conditions, which I think is interesting because that seems to be, go against his idea of peaceful propaganda and passive resistance, which I guess he doesn't necessarily include the idea of improving yourself as a part of that process. He said, in fact, the assumption that the achievement of superior social conditions in the world at large attended an improvement in the character of the world's citizens was seriously defective and another statement of the gospel of goodness. The very gist of our argument and our hope is that freedom, once allowed, social conditions steadily improve through the natural working of economic processes, and as a result, character improves. So he believed that, the character improving would come with the abolition of the state, rather than doing things to improve character first. Tucker also said, government makes itself felt alike in city and in country. Capital has its usurious grip on the farm as surely as on the workshop, and the oppressions and exactions of neither government nor capital can be avoided by migration. The state is the enemy, and the best means of fighting it can be found in communities already existing. As I said, he was against forming new communities or going to leaving the cities. He believed that the cities that were developing at the time were going to be the key to freeing people and to spreading this message. Also, Tucker basically described some of the earliest ideas which could be considered Egoism. He discussed creating a parallel economy within the structure of the original, attempting to include representatives of all trades and professions. He said they might carry on their production and distribution on the cost principle, basing their credit and exchange system upon a mutual bank of their own, which could issue a non-interest bearing currency to the members of the group and aid the disposal of their steadily increasing capital. It was his belief that such a system would prosper within the shell of the old and draw increasing attention and participation from other members of the urban population, gradually turning the whole city into a great hive of anarchist workers. It is such results that I look forward to, and for the accomplishment of such that I work, he said. And within 30 years, though, of that quote, he would admit that the process of centralization had gone too far, especially in financing and banking, and that he believed that, if that strategy was still effective, it would be on a very limited basis. So it's interesting to see as Tucker's life goes on, he sort of loses hope in some areas. He never stopped being an anarchist, but he did lose hope that anarchist ideas could be put into action because there was so much growing centralization and statism, and the parasitic class was becoming stronger. One of the big disagreements in liberty was based around Max Stirner. George Schumann, who is a Boston journalist and a student of Stirner, introduced the ideas into liberty. James L. Walker developed egoist ideas individually, and they both wrote in the journal Liberty about this. And for Tucker, his ideas of egoism developed out of Josiah Warren's sovereignty of the individual concept, which is similar in some ways to just essentially the golden rule. It's basically just saying that each individual is sovereign over their own self and free to do as they please as long as they harm no other. Tucker mostly focused on the economy, but he also found ethics intriguing. He was attempting to answer the question, what is wrong, and how to define a wrong. He says, the anarchist defined wrong as the result of some violation of the law of true liberty, which he qualified further as spontaneous association by natural selection. Benjamin Tucker says, the basic factor of social existence is that the individual shall be left entirely and absolutely free to regulate his life as experimental contact with other equally free individuals may seem to direct. Thus, right and wrong were principles subject to constant redefinition, qualification, and circumscription by each individual behaving in his associative capacity. Therefore, action taken either individually or as the result of voluntary association was qualified by the factor of direct responsibility. He says, under this law, all individuals have a right to do anything and everything which they may choose voluntarily to do at their own cost. He believed in Max Stirner's egoism in the sense of enlightened self-interest, and this was seen as the only motivating force in human conduct. Thus, the realization of this rejected altruism and the concept of obligations, duties, and rights. Benjamin Tucker then turned and dismissed natural rights as a myth. He said he believed in contracts, mutual agreements, voluntary agreements, and this, of course, leads to questions about might being right, and Tucker remedied this with the idea of contracts. He said, a tacit agreement or understanding between human beings as individuals living in daily contact and dependent on some sort of cooperation with each other for the satisfaction of their daily wants, not to trespass upon each other's individuality, the motive of this agreement being the purely egoistic desire for each for the peaceful preservation of his own individuality. He goes on to say, before contract is the right of might. Contract is the voluntary suspension of the right of might. The power secured by such suspension we may call the right of contract. These two rights, the right of might and the right of contract, are the only rights that have ever been or ever can be So-called moral rights have no existence. Now, of course, the acceptance of egoism, especially by a big thought leader like Benjamin Tucker, led to infighting, and many people left liberty. But of course, new people came in, new people who were egoists joined the fray. But a lot of the natural rights theorists, they left liberty. In 1891, John Beverly Robinson wrote in Liberty the following: "Virtue is virtue only because it is productive of happiness. Vice is vice only because it is productive of unhappiness. At the bottom, moreover, each one is unable to determine what is for the advantage or happiness of another, while each one knows better than anybody else what is for his own happiness. Therefore, at the bottom, each action must be judged by the individual as to whether it is conducive to his own happiness, not as to whether it will make somebody else happy. And this applies in its fullest force even to those actions called altruistic, which gives pleasure to the doer indirectly, although directly they may give pain to the doer and pleasure to somebody else. A kind action performed without any sense of gratification to the doer loses its character as a kind action. If the one who is benefited even suspects that his benefactor is loath to do him the kind act, his appreciation of it gives place to reluctance or even to resentment. Benevolence is hypocrisy when prompted by any feeling but personal delight in benevolence. Such, most briefly and inadequately sketched, is ego." In 1907, Tucker helped translate Stirner's The Ego in Its Own, and he said that this was one of his proudest achievements. He influenced and worked with a number of literary talents who published, and he also published their own journals and essays, including, I want to list some of the women who were involved because they don't often get the credit that they do, but there were women that were involved in the anarchist movement, including Sarah Elizabeth Holmes, Voltairine de Cleyre, Olive Schreiner, and Miriam Daniels. And there's also Gertrude B. Kelly. Despite more than 60 writers, Tucker maintained editorial control, and it never escaped his influence throughout the entire publication of Liberty. In the 1890s, there was an increase in focus on current political and social questions and a decline in theoretical controversies. He was sympathetic to labor struggles and skeptical of unionization. The association of anarchism with violence was all but complete by this time and in the minds of the public. Tucker wrote several times attempting to distinguish his brand of anarchism from the violent collectivists and communists. He wrote an essay called "Are Anarchists Thugs?" Post-Anarchists Are Thugs. In 1892, he moved to New York, and then in August 1901, he sailed for Europe, and Liberty suffered greatly in his absence. Throughout that entire time, nobody was paid in Liberty, and he also worked for the Boston Globe as a journalist from 1878 to 1889. And he also sold controversial books at his store. He had a store where he had Liberty, and he had a bunch of radical pamphlets, and including books at the time that were banned, like Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass book, which I guess was very controversial for the time. He was willing to host it and to sell it and to publish it, and Walt Whitman later thanked Benjamin Tucker for being willing to do that. And between 1905 and 1908, Liberty became a bi-monthly publication, and after years and years of writing, Benjamin Tucker finally decided to write. His friends pressured him into putting together a book, which officially came out in 1893, and it was called Instead of a Book. There was tons of pre-orders from all around the world, apparently. And April 1908, a fire destroyed everything, all of his bookstore. He lost a lot of his writings, a lot of manuscripts, and obviously he was very broken down and upset by this action, and he left to France until his death in 1939. By 1911, Tucker had lost faith in the possibility of anarchism coming together, and I want to read this powerful quote to you guys, which is a bit sad, but it's also interesting to see his realization of the time and what he felt. He said that when he wrote his essay, State Socialism and Anarchism, 25 years earlier, the denial of competition had not yet affected the enormous concentration of wealth that now so gravely threatens social order. Looking at the conditions of 1911, he said the way was not so clear. He admitted, the trust is now a monster which even the freest competition, could it be instituted, would be unable to destroy. And he said that concentrated capital had taken over, and it was his firm conviction that monopolies could be eliminated in a permanent manner only by economic solutions proposed by anarchism, even though they had, quote, passed for the moment beyond their reach. Therefore, he concluded that the problem must be grappled with for a time solely by forces political or revolutionary. Not exactly sure how what he meant by that, since he did maintain most of his life that he was against violence, but he did say that they had maintained control now and that anarchism was seeming impossible. And, he didn't have much faith in it towards the end of his life. And he believed that anarchism must be taught to the coming generations for it to actually matter. Education is a slow process, and for this reason we must hope that the day of readjustment may not come too quickly. Anarchists who endeavor to hasten it by joining in the propaganda of state socialism or revolution make a sad mistake indeed. They help to so force the march of events that the people will not have time to find out, by the study of their experience, that their troubles have been due to the rejection of competition. If this lesson shall not be learned in season, the past will be repeated in the future. And in 1930, nearly 20 years later, Tucker believed that technology and centralization had come too far, and essentially he said that civilization was doomed. Tuckerites spread across the United States, and they continue writing and also spreading his writings. And much of the anarchist movement at this time was interrupted by World War II, and gradually then dealing with the Depression and what followed after the Depression and then World War II, and just statism grew around the world. So it really became difficult to be an anarchist at this time, it seems. He says, "Capitalism is at least tolerable, which cannot be said of socialism or communism. Under any of these regimes, a sufficiently shrewd man can feather his nest." And another occasion he conceded, "Yes, I think the world is hell-bent. War is certainly to come, but how soon I do not know. I hate the age in which I live, but I do not hate myself for living in it." But he said, "There is fun in fighting. It is not necessary to hope in order to persevere." Benjamin Tucker would end up dying at the age of 86 years old in Monaco on June 22nd, 1939. His works would continue to inspire others, and as I mentioned earlier, continue to inspire people to this day, including the revivalist anarchist movement, anarcho-capitalist libertarian movement that was led by Murray Rothbard in America in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s and on. Also, his views on socialism and anarchist socialism influenced many left anarchists, and they continue to dissect his words and to examine and to look for meaning within him. So I advise anyone who wants to understand Benjamin Tucker to read Men Against the State. There's a lot of information in there, and seek out his own books and seek out copies of Liberty, because there's tons of them online, and you can really understand these debates from back in the day, and you can get to know who Benjamin Tucker was better. Overall, I think he was a really principled, intelligent, smart man who did a lot of writing, and it really blows me away to understand how much work he put into spreading the anarchist message. Thank you guys for listening. My name is Derrick Broze. I'll talk to you soon.